Welcome students. Today we will be discussing the subject of Dalit identity. In India, more than 80% of the people still live in villages. Most members of the scheduled castes are agricultural laborers who lack land. Only a small portion of the scheduled caste members own between 1 and 10 bighas of land. Human life's economic component is just as significant as its political, religious or even social components. Because it controls so many facets of our lives, it is sometimes said that being reliant economically equates to being dependent in every other way. The lack of a sociological definition of the term Dalits, even after a century of sociology in India, is astounding, given that Dalits have not been given a distinct place in relation to the Hindu social order. At best, sociologists have defined the term Dalits in literary and cultural terms, or they have relied on the political definition of the term as stated in the platform of the political organization Dalit Panthers in 1973. The nature and makeup of the population that name Dalit denotes are difficult to comprehend because there is no precise description of what it means. Consequently, misunderstanding is a constant. It is crucial to develop a scientific definition of Dalit as a result. Gangadhar Patnavane asserts that Dalit is not a caste. Dalits stand for a revolution and change. The Dalit holds humanism to be true. Because they enslaved him, he disbelieves in the existence of God, reincarnation, soul, faith and heaven. He also disbelieves in religious texts that teach discrimination. In this lesson, we will be trying to conclude an understanding of Dalit identity. In this session, we will be looking at the following concepts. They are Dalit identity, cultural memory associated with Dalit identity and social exclusion of Dalits. According to Dr. Ambedkar's view, some Dalit intellectuals emphasize the history of their distinct identity in the philosophical postulation produced by the Lokayats and Buddhism. They contend that Dalits have a materialistic philosophy based worldview that is fundamentally distinct from Brahmanism. They rejected karma, punarjanma, that is rebirth, and moksha because they were materialistic, that is, they consider moksha as materialistic. They challenged the caste system because they believed in it was a Brahminical sham of stealing and misleading the common people. We saw in the previous session that caste is a type of social stratification that involves hierarchically structured closed endogamous divisions to which membership is attributable by bloodline, between which interaction is confined and mobility is impractical. Dalits are predominantly scheduled caste which appear at the bottom of this fixed hierarchy. They come under the overarching umbrella term Dalits. Dr. Ambedkar developed the concept of emancipation and the rejection of unfair system. A new identity has emerged through the political process that transcends caste, regional, linguistic and religious lines. Eleanor Zeliot contends that Dr. Ambedkar's image is more well known today and in some ways more significant than it was during his lifetime. Dr. Ambedkar was a leader of the Dalit movement and provided its ideology. Even while the Neo-Buddhist movement and Dr. Ambedkar played significant roles in its development, internalization and legitimization, it no longer exclusively refers to Neo-Buddhists. Hindu Dalits work for equality today, not in the future life, despite worshipping Hindu gods and goddesses and reading the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Additionally, they choose to identify as Dalits no matter their creed, caste or political alliance. All Dalits view Ambedkar as their leader. All social groups have several identities. Some of them become muddled with time while others change. Several people live side by side the process is not an exemption because of Dalit identity. Though more and more members of SCs, including elite and diverse segments of society, prefer to identify as Dalits in public rather than Harijans, SCs or untouchables, the identity is still developing, particularly in relation to caste Hindus. It coexists with other secular identities as well as primitive ones. Like everyone else, Dalits have a variety of identities that shift depending on the situation. They are members of many castes, linguistic communities and religious groups. What's significant is that the term Dalit has started to be used as a suffix with these identities. That is, one is a Hindu, Muslim or Christian Dalit, as well as Chamar, Mahar, Jat and Bankar Dalit, as well as a Gujarati, Maharashtrian or Bihari Dalit. Within each of them, there are more identities that could be referred to as subunits such as Protestant and Catholic Christianity. In one context, Dalits have maintained their traditional identity. In the other, they have created and asserted a new social identity of their choice. Reclaiming their identity is an important step towards their emancipation from the cultural memory associated with the set hierarchies. Now we can see the cultural memory associated with Dalit identity as given by D.R. Nagaraj. D.R. Nagaraj examines the connection between cultural memory and its impact on Dalit identity through a number of historical narratives. He begins by narrating how Dalit activists in Chennapura village asked that land title deeds be given to landless Dalits rather than turning the entire area into a house plot. Nagaraj advises them to request the village tank instead because it would be more useful, but the Dalit activists correctly point out that they would prefer to obtain the land for their own people before the upper castes punish it in some way. After all, they argue that a water tank will eventually be lost to future generations because it will be replaced by something. A older woman recounts the tale of King Chandradhara to Nagaraj, who was snared by illusion, lost his memory and surrendered to the demon king who had imposed the illusion upon him. King Chandradhara had no issues with his new life and only needed his queen's help to reclaim his memories of his former life as a king. The Dalit campaigners then explained that since their lives had always been that of a Bangi, they would not mind the illusions since they were far better than their reality. Although his delusions were not real, they appeared true and he became Bangi as a result. Nagaraj utilizes this as the basis for his three modalities of tracking Dalit history in accordance with cultural memory. As said by D.R. Nagaraj, the problematic act of erasing cultural memory is the first key element in the denigrated tribes' response to the modernization project that colonizers started. Another crucial step in this procedure is creating a new memory structure. The lower caste movements of the 20th century have run into a wide range of challenging issues due to the challenge of eradicating what cannot be readily erased. M.C. Raja and other constitutionalists represented the pragmatic school of thought which was largely uninterested in issues pertaining to cultural symbolism and memory. For them, the issue of cultural memory was secondary to the lower castes' upper mobility in terms of economic, social and political power. They had a highly pragmatic stance on the subject of memories and generally sided with the victor. The best illustration of this was the blatant backing of Gandhiji's during the temple entry campaign. Since they were firmly committed to the materialistic ideals and ends, they had little interest in cultural hermeneutics, and this also led to their downfall. Nagaraj mentions Periyar's self-respect movement in Tamil Nadu and claims that pragmatists would want to follow Periyar's lead because the movement was founded on rationalist ideas that were effectively applied in Tamil Nadu and still have significance today. Despite this, the Dalit movement find it difficult to adopt a pragmatic approach because they stand to lose more as a result. The self-respect movement disregards any religion or caste-based identification, and giving up the identity would mean giving up the main idea of pragmatism. The second method discusses radical revival, and Nagaraj cites the Ad-Dharm movement in Manguram as an example. In this movement, radical narratives are pasted on to Dalit history to demonstrate how Hindus from Iran exploited their beautiful past. While it does contribute to the development of a movement and uses radicalism to resuscitate a built history, it ultimately falls short of stories with deeper spiritual undertones, since these radical stories were unable to produce the optimum amount of spiritualism and political impact. This movement was not particularly effective and was not supported by history. Even while Ravidas' symbol served as an ideology to underpin the story, it could not overcome discrimination on its own. The third mode discusses the alternative memory that is given by Baba Saheb Ambedkar. Uses to accept what is untouchable as something to be proud of and canonize the Dalit identity as a powerful force in the Indian context. Ambedkar is in favor of modernity because it can help create a new history to replace the historical discrimination against Dalits that is still strongly tied to their cultural memory. Ambedkar's lofty aspiration to embrace modernity are well placed, but he failed to take into account the predominance that will endure even in the modern day. Given that rural life is not as ideal as Gandhi suggests, he does not embrace Gandhi's Gramin Swaraj. Gandhi's notion of transforming something unattached to the Dalit identity into something acceptable was novel, but it was also unpopular. Dalit identity, imprinted by utilizing collective cultural memory held by society as a whole, not only by Dalits. Even if numerous strategies have been consistently used throughout history to eradicate the unfavorable stigma attached to Dalits, this will only be achieved if society as a whole, not only Dalits, adopt this viewpoint. Even while the self-respect movement was successful in pushing the center out, it is not the strategy that will always succeed. Nagaraj claims that Gandhi and Ambedkar are both somewhat correct, but he does not explain why Gandhi's approaches are sound in the same way that he explained Ambedkar's. Ambedkar's goal may have been a touch too lofty, but they are nevertheless a crucial component of the identity Dalits still maintain today. Ambedkar's proposal to advance towards such a state is acceptable to Dalits since it would allow them to erase the historical imbalance previously displayed. Modernization has a tendency to erase cultural memory gradually. Therefore, discrimination and inequality against Dalits are in some ways a result of colonization, and any effort to escape that oligarch fish tank is motivated by a decolonial drive. Social exclusion of Dalits. To understand the social foundation upon which the name Dalit is formed, Vivek Kumar has attempted to describe it. He asserts that the term Dalit refers to a group of people who share the following traits. To start with, unique structural location in the Hindu social order. Cumulative social exclusion they suffer because of their structural location. Long history of social exclusion. Unalterable social status based on caste. Construction of consciousness anchored in the historicity of social exclusion because of structural location. If we combine these traits, we can identify the social group that will be distinct from tribes, the poor and women. In the prior definition, the Dalits' distinctive structural position was described, showing how these people were excluded from a valid and fixed position within the Hindu social order. They also lacked a genuine place in that social framework, which resulted in their suffering from cumulative social marginalization. Now we can see the variety of social exclusion that is being manifested in the Hindu social structure. Social exclusion. In the Rig Veda, Dalit existence is denied. Democratic exclusion, regulatory exclusion, there is no mention in the Varna scheme. They are denied the sacred thread wearing right. They were kept out of ashramas and no dharma prescription included the Dalits. Being kept out of Purushartha was common. Predestination by exclusion impediment them. Then we have the practice of untouchability. Untouchability is an inhuman practice that was practiced against Dalits. This included residential segregation. It happens usually in the southern part of the village. Refusal to accept them and deny them access to water, refusal to take Dalit food, restrictions on sitting with Dalits in the same room, restriction on sharing in celebrations, denial of access to the home and food, and lastly denial of access to temples. Then we can see the atrocities against Dalits. Dalits have always been marginalized, and this precarious state of their society has led to that community being exploited and extorted as they could not defend themselves in a biased setting. Dalit women being raped, killing a Dalit, Dalit suffers grievous harm, arson, looting and linking them to the crime rather than them as the victims, ridiculed in both sacred scriptures and culture, refusal to accept them wearing attire typical of upper castes such as shoes, turban and clothing. Hazardous and stigmatized occupation. Dalits were made to work in certain stigmatized vocations either by being forced into them or being denied the opportunity to do so. Cleaning human waste, scavenging for and cleaning manholes are a few examples. Dalit women's function as midwives, removing carcasses, grave digging, burning the deceased, toddy tapping, pig farming, butchering and drumming at the time of death, washing dirty garments, refusal to participate in wedding and funeral processions. Political exclusion. Dalits faced refusal to participate in the electoral process as a marginalized group that is likewise prohibited from voting in decision making processes. Then we can see the religious exclusion. Religious exclusion from various religious social structures and the legality of religion as an excuse for exclusion. They are also excluded economically. Dalits continue to experience restrictions on their right to choose their occupation and their ability to access resources. Educational exclusion. Dalits are subject to educational exclusion by being barred from owning educational institutions, not being allowed to acquire information, not being allowed to impart knowledge and being excluded from the curriculum. Internal exclusion. Dalits face exclusion within their own communities and even within their same religion and subcaste because it affects all facets of life. This social exclusion is cumulative. It is cumulative because it affects many facets of life, including the political, social, religious and economic ones. Exclusion has a long history that dates back around 1,000 years. Additionally, according to Kumar, the status resulting from this exclusion cannot be changed even if the group's members move up in the economic and educational ladder or immigrate to another country and create a diaspora. Members of these groups are united by their structural location, cumulative exclusion, long history of exclusion, and unchangeable social position which transcends caste, linguistic, and regional distinction. Additionally, other symbols like the Buddha, Ambedkar, etc. now serve as a means of unification. As a result, we can refer to the Dalits as a group of people who share the aforementioned 5 traits. Like Brahmins, Dalits do not have material reasons to keep a caste-based system in place. Because of the power of the dominant caste environment in which they live, the practice of hierarchy among them is a cultural imposition rather than a reflection of their preferences. Dalits copy the dominant caste, that is, in their immediate area, whether it is a Kshatriya or Shudras, rather than imitating Brahmins and Brahminical doctrine per se. More often than not, copying reveals a power dynamic rather than an agreed upon ideology. Regardless of the causes for its persistence, the ubiquity of the attributed hierarchical order and everything that goes with it, including attitude and behavior, cannot be dismissed as a false consciousness. Competition among the many Dalit jatis and the attitude of OBCs towards SCs who do not adhere to the Brahminical model of upward mobility are two of the main issues that the united Dalit movement is having in its fight against Brahminism. Dr. Ambedkar was hesitant about the lower castes banding together to combat the caste system. He noted that it was impossible for the lower castes to unite against the caste system because of the gradation among the castes. It is not surprising that Dalits have reacted in a variety of religious ways, given that social exclusion of the former untouchables or Dalits was sanctioned by religion. Dalits protested extreme forms of exclusion and created a positive identity through a multifaceted strategy according to Cohn, Webster and Dubé. We can see what are they. First one is socio-religious reform movements. Then transferring allegiance away from Hinduism. The religious conversion for the establishment of their own paths. Movements for socio-religious change that sought to preserve the Hindu social structure while enhancing the social standing of low caste communities through procedures like Sanskritization. The second one is Dalits were able to overcome Hinduism's built-in caste restrictions by switching their alliances to other religions with both Indian and foreign roots. An illustration of this is the widespread conversion of Dalits in India to Islam. Affiliation in the Dalit spans is quite uncertain. For instance, Guptu examines the establishment of Raitas and Kabir Panths in 4 Uttar Pradesh regions where the British built cantonments and Bhakti was proclaimed the Dalit religion after 1857. Overall, these actions were taken by Dalits towards emancipation, which was further taken forward by Dr. Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism in 1956. It is clear that Ambedkar represents the new Buddhist Dalit identity, and some people even see him as a divine figure, says Belts. Dalits are being more and more converted to Buddhism over time. Earlier, it was discovered that the majority of uneducated Dalit people had converted to Buddhism, but it was being discovered that an increasing number of literate, employed and professional people are doing the same. This goes to show that Ambedkar continues to have an unflinching image as the purveyor of Dalit emancipation. To summarize, in Hindu social structure, Dalits do not have a special position. According to Gangadhar Panta Vane, Dalit is not a caste. According to Dr. Eleanor Zelliot, Dr. Ambedkar's reputation is more well known and in some respects more significant than it was when he was alive. Scheduled caste, which are primarily Dalits, are at the very bottom of this rigid system. They fall within the broad category of Dalits. Every Dalit, regardless of creed, caste or political affiliation, sees Ambedkar as their leader. Dalits, like everyone else, have a range of identities that change based on the circumstances. The word Dalit has begun to be employed with these identities as a suffix. The term Dalit has started to be used as a suffix for different Dalit identities, that is, one in a Hindu, Muslim or Christian Dalit, as well as Chammar, Mahar, Jahat and Mankar Dalit. Dalits have preserved their traditional identities in some contexts while forging new social identities in others. The first crucial component of denigrated tribes' response to the modernization initiative that colonizers initiated is the problematic act of erasing cultural memory. Making a new memory structure is an essential step in this process. The difficulty of eliminating what cannot be easily erased has caused the lower caste movements of the 20th century to encounter a variety of difficult problems. The pragmatic school of thinking, which was essentially unconcerned with concerns relating to cultural symbolism and memory, was represented by M.C. Raja and other constitutionalists. For them, the issue of cultural memory was secondary to the lower castes' upper mobility in terms of economic, social and political power. Nagaraj mentions Periyar's self-respect movement in Tamil Nadu and claims pragmatists would want to follow its lead. The lofty goal of Baba Sahib Ambedkar to embrace modernity are admirable, but he neglected to consider the hegemony that will continue even in the modern era. Gandhi had the unique but unpopular idea of making something unrelated to Dalit identity into something what was acceptable. Cultural memory often becomes gradually lost as a result of modernization. In certain instances, colonization is a contributing factor to discrimination and inequality against Dalits. Exclusion has a long history that dates back around 1,000 years. It has a cumulative effect on many facets of life, including the political, social, religious and economic ones. Like Brahmins, Dalits lack a financial motive to uphold a caste-based structure. Instead of directly copying Brahmanism, Dalits imitate the dominant caste that is present in their immediate surrounding. The prevalence of the imputed hierarchical order and everything that goes with it, including attitude and behavior, cannot be dismissed as the false consciousness, regardless of the reasons for its persistence. Dalit identity, like all other identities, is a fluid entity. Thank you.